You had every reason to doubt all three. Three different adults with two different mothers in an effort to prove paternity, to stop denying you.
Yes, Your Honor.
He didn't know you existed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now you...
Your full name as Junior, why would you sign my birth certificate? If you deny me as your child, it hurts me like all get out.
For a week, she came up and introduced herself to me. But as time went on, I started hearing rumors that she was having sex with other men.
Pregnant?
Yes.
And what did your pastor tell you?
Do the right thing, make her an honorable woman.
You married her even though you had doubts?
Yes. Auditioned for a band.
Yes.
The trumpet player was acting kind of strange, like he didn't want me, and I knew everything went well. He's like, I know this guy is tripping and everything, but I think the reason he's tripping is because he thinks you're here to start some trouble. He said, well, she has been with him, but he didn't know that she was married.
Oh.
The court of Judge Lauren Lake becomes the center of gravity when adults who have lived decades without answers finally confront one man, one record of doubt, and one decisive DNA test. The emotional demand in this paternity hearing is higher than any ordinary dispute, because here the evidence stage in divorce case practices, the adverse inference in evidence act, and the relationship between law and justice merge into lived human consequences. Three adults enter, each believing they share the same father. Their testimonies carry abandonment, longing, loss, and dignity. The defendant, Victor Medley, insists his mistrust was justified, citing rumors, history, contradictory relationships, and moral uncertainty. The sons, however, carry lived pain, and the daughter carries identity confusion shaped by foster care, distance, and a lifelong search for origin. The court listens to every detail calmly, analytically, but the emotional intensity never hides behind legal language. In this paternity setting, DNA test people regret taking stories merge with those who beg for clarity, because not every truth heals instantly, but every truth lands permanently. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, truth changes everything. Podcast discussions become real, not intellectual, and the game-changing attorney podcast themes echo in the background, not as theory, but as procedural reality. The concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes visible, not the clean version in textbooks, but the lived version where adults demand recognition for childhoods they were denied. The son's present resemblance, memory fragments, grandparent relationships, medical crisis experiences, and emotional absence. They express that the defendant's denials shaped their adolescence and their entire adult identity. The father claims suspicion, infidelity stories, and early marital pressure. He explains that before DNA science evolved, proof was inaccessible, turning uncertainty into a decades-long justification for emotional retreat. Yet, in the modern courtroom where swab tests replace invasive blood procedures, the obstacles vanish, and accountability stands alone. Judge Lauren Lake maintains balanced authority. She does not shame, does not humiliate, but she does not allow avoidance either. She presses gently but firmly that justice is not merely about genetic truth. It is also about human restoration. The courtroom atmosphere resembles Celebrate Recovery testimonies, not because it is religious, but because confession, acceptance, and forgiveness become part of the legal resolution. All three adult claimants express what fatherlessness costs, not financially, but psychologically, developmentally, relationally. When the DNA results confirm the paternity of the two sons, the room shifts. The defendant can no longer hide behind probability, rumor, or suspicion. The truth is authoritative, written, verified, and undeniable. The sons do not celebrate arrogantly. They show anger, relief, grief, and closure simultaneously. The father expresses mixed responses, defensiveness, then softening, then recognition. The identity confirmation is followed by the moral obligation of reconciling decades of distance. Supreme Court child support precedents are implied in tone. Once truth is determined, responsibility must follow. Then the third claimant, the daughter, waits. Her personal story includes foster care placements, emotional voids, and a mirror reflection that never aligned with maternal lineage. She reached out to the defendant before court, and he once accepted her, even called her daughter. Yet courtroom clarity proves she is not his biological child. The revelation does not humiliate her. Instead, Judge Lauren Lake frames the finding with dignity. The court acknowledges the emotional courage of a person who searched, asked, hoped, and stood before legal authority to finalize her identity journey. The defendant's reaction to her result contradicts his earlier sternness. He shows regret, compassion, and a different tone than he displayed with the sons. The shift confirms that truth changes everything is not just a verdict line. It is an emotional and relational pivot. The daughter receives closure, even if not biological recognition. The court becomes not merely a venue of DNA determinations, but a space of human rehabilitation. It resembles adoption stories' full episodes, where people find family not only through blood, but through acceptance, acknowledgement, and chosen bonds. The sons and father share an unspoken negotiation of forgiveness. They express that his absence shaped their upbringing, their emotional framework, and their sense of belonging. The father admits imperfections, misunderstandings, and fear, but not cruelty. The relationship between law and justice becomes visible. Law gave a result, but justice demands future action, contact, accountability, healing, intentional fatherhood. Judge Lauren Lake insists that statistics and genetics mean nothing if not followed by presence, apologies, and repair. The court tone mirrors intellectually what the Divorce Course podcast discusses about emotional residue after legal dissolution. Families do not resume automatically after legal confirmation. They rebuild deliberately. Truth does not rewrite childhood, but it does unlock adulthood. The courtroom becomes a case study in modern evidence ethics. The adverse inference in Evidence Act perspective reminds all parties that refusal, delay, or avoidance of testing carries legal weight. The defendant's decades-long refusal now carries moral weight. He realizes the sons did not request financial compensation or retroactive punishment. They only requested acknowledgement. It becomes clear that the law cannot force paternal love, but it can remove denial, silence, and ambiguity. In scholarly sense, the case becomes reference material for concept of justice in jurisprudence courses, not because it expands doctrine, but because it exhibits the lived collisions between human pain and legal finality. The DNA test here is not merely forensic. It becomes philosophical, emotional, and familial. Cheating stories, past rumors, marital breakdown narratives, and informal community gossip become irrelevant once genetic truth is declared. The court's purpose is not to relitigate human imperfection. It is to stabilize identity. The transition from paternity dispute to emotional reconstruction resembles segments heard in Truth Changes Everything podcast and episodes about healing through disclosure, confession, and verified evidence. Yet, unlike curated audio reflections, this courtroom unfolds raw, unedited, unfiltered. Tears are real, posture shifts, voices tremble. Judge Lauren Lake maintains structured grace, ensuring dignity even when tempers rise. This description also echoes lessons from the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, highlighting how law professionals must handle not only statutes, but the weight of generational trauma. A DNA result is the legal moment, but a changed life trajectory is the justice result. In conclusion of this first section, the court session documented in 3 adults are in court to see if the same man is their father establishes a model where paternity truth, legal ethics, and emotional reconciliation converge. The sons receive confirmation, the daughter receives closure, and the father receives a moral directive to step forward differently than he stepped back decades ago. The record stands, the truth is sealed, and Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom demonstrates the rare space where legal authority meets human restoration. The second phase of this courtroom description deepens into the ethical and structural obligations that emerge once truth is established. When Judge Lauren Lake confirms paternity for the 2 adult sons, the court transitions from identification to responsibility. The emotional relief is layered with the recognition that decades of paternal absence cannot be undone, but must be answered. The defendant is forced to see his sons not as rumors, not as contested stories, but as biological extensions of himself who endured fatherlessness, while watching others grow up with certainty. At this point, the courtroom feels like the intersection of legal doctrine and trauma processing. The relationship between law and justice becomes no longer theoretical. Justice is not measured by the DNA report alone, but by the father's willingness to step into the lives he once doubted. The court's tone conveys that paternity confirmation is the starting point, not the end. Truth changes everything. Podcast themes echo through the emotional landscape. Truth disrupts narratives built on suspicion, generational silence, and unverified assumptions. The judge's role extends beyond adjudication. She becomes interpreter of relational consequences. Judge Lauren Lake encourages the newly confirmed father to accept what science removed from debate. Even if the past cannot be revised, the future can be consciously built. The courtroom atmosphere reflects celebrate recovery testimonies, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of wounded individuals openly acknowledging pain, betrayal, and forgiveness. The son's expressions reveal not triumph but exhaustion, the emotional fatigue of a lifetime seeking acknowledgement. They did not file the case to win an argument, but to obtain closure. In legal structure, paternity cases are often associated with child support orders, visitation rights, and custody frameworks, as seen in Supreme Court child support references. But here, the litigants are adults, and the objective shifts from financial obligation to emotional legitimacy. The father cannot be ordered to repair time, but he is morally instructed to engage with dignity. For decades, identity confusion functioned like an unresolved legal file. The DNA confirmation closes it, but healing requires deliberate participation. Then attention returns to the daughter who was declared not biologically connected to the defendant. Her emotional presence marks the complexity of adoption stories' full episodes, where belonging is sometimes discovered outside bloodlines. She entered hopping for a genetic link, but leaves with a different form of closure. Now she knows whom not to search for anymore. Judge Lauren Lake ensures that the result does not define her worth, but clarifies her origin path. The emphasis is not on loss, but on certainty. The distinction between biological truth and relational potential remains clear. Biology is not offered, but respect is. The courtroom also subtly reflects the Divorce Course podcast themes. Relational breakdowns create long-lasting effects that extend beyond separation, reshaping children's narratives, adult trust patterns, and intergenerational psychology. The defendant's past marriage, dissolved through mistrust and rumor, produced lifelong consequences for the offspring who lived with doubt in their own skin. The case demonstrates that when legal systems finalize a divorce, emotional systems remain unclosed until identity clarity is provided years later. Throughout this moment, Judge Lauren Lake embodies the balance between judicial objectivity and empathetic leadership. She recognizes that legal truth must be accompanied by human restoration. The verdict does not shame the father, nor does it glorify the children. It simply states with full weight what is. The judge's approach aligns with themes of the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, in which attorneys and judges are tasked not only with statute interpretation, but with managing the psychological aftermath of legal determinations. The father's emotional shift during the daughter's non-paternity outcome becomes a powerful symbol of the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not merely about identifying biological connections. It is about handling disconnection honorably. The father offers kindness without requirement, indicating that human bonds can emerge from clarity rather than genetics. That symbolic step dissolves the earlier adversarial tone and moves the courtroom toward reconciliation. When the sons receive confirmation, they are not celebratory in a victorious sense. They are reflective, serious and deeply aware that a surname, a genetic code, and a familial resemblance have finally been validated in front of judicial authority. They existed biologically all along, but legally and emotionally, they were suspended between claim and denial. Once their identity is confirmed, the court becomes their platform of emotional release. They no longer speak as claimants. They stand as acknowledged sons. The father's face conveys, without the need for dialogue, that DNA does not only reveal paternity, it reveals responsibility. For years, he defended doubt. Now, he must defend presence. The adverse inference in Evidence Act becomes illustrated in lived consequence. His earlier refusal to test transformed uncertainty into emotional estrangement. If testing had been pursued decades earlier, the family structure might have been different. The ruling does not punish him, but it exposes the cost of hesitation. In this phase, the daughter becomes a symbol of a different legal truth. DNA absence is not rejection, it is clarity. Her story mirrors people regret taking DNA test complexity, not because the result harms her, but because it forces a shift in identity narrative. She approached with hope, not malice. Now she departs with knowledge instead of ambiguity. Judge Lauren Lake ensures she does not leave with shame, but with validated human experience. Legal procedure, emotional discourse, and psychological processing coexist in this courtroom. This is not a trial of guilt, but a dissolution of uncertainty. The father stands before the children not as defendant alone, but as future participant. The judge reminds the court that truth is not a weapon, it is a foundation. Unlike cheating stories that become sensational or punitive, here suspicion is transformed into closure. In jurisprudence, the relationship between law and justice is often debated. Law defines outcome, justice defines impact. This case demonstrates that both can coexist. DNA provided the law, empathy provided justice. The ruling does not force reconciliation but sets the stage where reconciliation is possible. Without legal clarity, reconciliation remains emotional guesswork. The sons now face future birthdays, reunions, and adult decisions no longer clouded by doubt. Their identities evolve from hypothetical paternity claims into confirmed lineage. They carry new freedom. When they look in the mirror, they no longer search for resemblance as evidence. The court has provided that. Emotional healing may require time, conversation, boundaries, and patience, but it now rests on truth rather than speculation. The father also gains something, closure over decades of suspicion. Though the truth may feel heavy, it also relieves him of defensive posture. He no longer needs to justify doubt. He needs to practice presence. In this second phase, the courtroom functions not as a battleground but as a restoration chamber. The DNA results have been spoken, the relationships have been clarified, and Judge Lauren Lake has ensured that no party leaves stripped of dignity. The law has spoken. Now life must respond. The final portion of this courtroom account settles into the long horizon of what happens after a DNA verdict. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, results do not end a family story. They begin the honest version of it. The courtroom is not merely the site of testing, but the clearing where narratives, excuses, and generational silence are dismantled in favor of confirmed identity. The sons, who entered tense with unresolved memory and emotional injury, now stand in possession of truth. Their father exists not as rumor, denial, or distant absence, but as legally recognized biological parent. It is the end of doubt but the beginning of repair. The relationship between law and justice reveals its layered truth. The law gives structure, but justice is lived in the days, months, and years following the judge's ruling. This alignment mirrors long-form reflections heard in Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes, where the emotional work begins only after the facts are stabilized. Judge Lauren Lake has now completed the legal function, but her final emphasis underscores that the human function remains. Emotional reconstruction is not mandated, but encouraged. The courtroom takes on the tone of celebrate recovery testimonies, not because of religious framing, but because accountability and forgiveness become part of witness. The sons do not appear vengeful. They appear relieved, yet grieving the time that could have been. They discover that obtaining truth does not erase the ache of years spent wondering. Knowledge resolves confusion, but it also confronts the wounds that uncertainty produced. The daughter, whose identity clarification ended differently, represents the complexity of modern familial search. She pursued answers in a world shaped by algorithm-based lineage, genetic databases, and emotional urgency. Her situation echoes people regret taking DNA test narratives, not because she regrets seeking, but because she now must navigate a truth that denies one hope while opening the path toward another. Judge Lauren Lake ensures she leaves with dignity. Clarity is not disappointment but direction. The courtroom record aligns with educational frameworks familiar to the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where family law is depicted as a space that blends scientific confirmation with psychological responsibility. Lawyers and judges act not only as legal authorities, but as custodians of identity outcomes. What began as a paternity dispute concludes as a jurisprudential case study in the concept of justice in jurisprudence, in which procedural fairness meets emotional validation. The father, previously defended by suspicion and decades of untested assumptions, now stands without the shield of doubt. DNA confirmation erased the defense, but it also released him from the psychological tension of uncertainty. He has spent years convinced of his own caution. The verdict now presents an invitation to exchange caution for connection. His sons do not demand repayment for fatherless years. They demand presence going forward. The Supreme Court child support principle, that truth triggers responsibility, is mirrored here, not through financial mandate but through emotional obligation. His change of posture during the daughter's non-paternity result reflects a deeper truth. Compassion is not limited to bloodlines. His initial rigidity softens, confirming that legal outcomes do not dictate human affinity. He is not her father genetically, but the court moment shows that recognition and care do not require biological entitlement. The emotional clarity aligns with adoption stories' full episodes, where belonging is rebuilt not solely through DNA, but through chosen connection. The three adults now understand their identities beyond doubt. For the sons, paternal confirmation ends the emotional suspension that defined their childhoods. For the daughter, paternal exclusion ends the uncertainty that shaped her adult reflection. Each leaves knowing who they are in relation to the defendant and who they are not. This closure is the court justice result. Judge Lauren Lake demonstrates that legal authority can coexist with empathy without compromising the bench's neutrality. She grants truth without condemning character. She allows grief to be expressed without letting it override decorum. This aligns with tones of the Divorce Course podcast, where relational breakdowns leave residual storylines that only truth and time can reconcile. Here, the divorce that occurred decades earlier did not resolve identity. It merely ended a marriage. The Paternity Court completed what the Divorce Court could not: definitive lineage clarification. In the longer arc, the sons must now build new adult relationships with a father they biologically share but did not socially experience. They must learn his voice, history, habits, and failures not as litigants but as children returned. The emotional work begins after adjournment. The father, now confirmed, must relearn fatherhood without parental authority, but with humility. His new role is not instructor but reconciler. The daughter's path continues in a different direction. She will search again, but now she searches without silence. Her road no longer loops around the same name. She is free to seek origin rather than permission. She becomes the embodiment of closure without collapse. She did not lose a father. She lost a false endpoint and gained an accurate map. The broader public dimension, reflected in courtroom media culture such as full-length cheating stories broadcasts or high-engagement paternity episodes, often emphasizes shock over substance. But here, the emphasis rests on restoration rather than spectacle. The case teaches that sensational elements fade, but identity truth remains. Judge Lauren Lake frames the moment with solemn assurance rather than dramatic reveal. The DNA result is not entertainment, it is liberation. In legal philosophy terms, the case completes a circle. The adverse inference in Evidence Act theme previously visible now resolves. Delay and suspicion created decades of internal conflict, but modern testing removed all barriers to clarity. If evidence had been pursued early, the sons might have lived with truth rather than theory. Yet the court does not weaponize hindsight. Instead, it honors the complexity of human timing. The sons begin to articulate, not in words but in posture, what adulthood means when identity is finally solid. They lived long enough to feel the absence, and now they live long enough to witness recognition. It is not compensation, but confirmation. Judge Lauren Lake closes the narrative with equilibrium. She does not command reconciliation, but she invites it. She does not assign blame, but she acknowledges impact. Because in this courtroom, truth changes everything is not simply a phrase. It is the guiding ethic. Legal closure is declared. Emotional closure is offered. Familial reconstruction remains voluntary. The court's role ends at the threshold of truth. The family must carry it forward. In this trilogy of identity, doubt, and confirmation, all intertwined by DNA evidence and emotional testimony, the result stands as clear documentation that legal systems can illuminate the deepest human questions. Biology has spoken. Law has defined. Justice has guided. Now life, outside the courtroom walls, must continue the work.